What the debt deal did so far was essentially to only put on the table what are called discretionary spending items. It includes defense, but it also includes things like education and highways and a lot of other things that we tend to think of as the basic functions of government. That left for this new super committee all the other big items, which includes Medicare, includes Social Security, and potentially includes taxes. And the simple fact is that's where all of the money is. I see no way that this Congress, our future Congresses, can avoid dealing with what I'm calling the big three: healthcare cost growth, which is unsustainable; retirement issues, which not only affect current beneficiaries and future beneficiaries in terms of the benefits they're going to get, but affect the number of taxpayers that we have paying these taxes in the future. And the third one, taxes themselves. I don't see any way we're going to be able to get through a long period of reform without substantial movement on all three fronts. Whether it takes place this year is another question. There are a lot of constraints now. In my view, the target for deficit reduction over the next 10 years is actually fairly modest relative to what we have to do. The way the deal is crafted, they've aimed for a target as the deficit reduction over the next 10 years. And in point of fact, the main problems, the main imbalances in Medicare and Social Security are long-term imbalances. So they compound over time, they get worse and worse after 10 years. So the first 10 years in many ways are less important for those systems, and yet the target of the agreements is how much of a deficit reduction they achieve over the first 10 years. Right now, one party, the Republicans, have tended to argue that taxes are off the table, although there have been exceptions on that side of the aisle. And on the Democratic side, there's been a tendency to argue that Social Security is off the table, at least for the near terms. And the biggest item of all on the spending side is Medicare. So it's very hard to take Medicare off the table. The gap's huge. It has to be closed. If you try to exclude some very, very big items, it becomes very, very hard to close that gap. What's unique about our retirement health programs more than any others are that they have a huge amount of growth built into them. In Social Security, the growth is built through a variety of factors, such as the fact that we live longer, so we get more years of retirement support. It's also built in the sense that if you make 30% more than your parents, assuming wages go up over time, that's a question mark these days, but let's be optimistic, then your benefits will be 30% higher. Healthcare is getting better, and that's how we're actually benefiting a lot from our growth in income as an economy, whether we're a worker or a retired person. So future generations have a lot of benefits that are scheduled to go to them that will not go to, say, current generations of retirees. However, it's the big however, that growth rate is so high that it's unsustainable. So obviously we're saying, yes, future beneficiaries are going to see changes relative to current beneficiaries. That's already built into law. The question is whether the growth rate that's now built in can possibly be maintained, and the answer is no. If we're talking about current retirees, in point of fact, Social Security reform is probably the one reform that for the most part won't hit them at all, because except for a possible adjustment in the cost of living allowance, a so-called COLA, a slight adjustment there. Outside of that, almost every other reform that's talked about in Social Security only affects people in the future. So in many ways, of all the budget reforms the current elderly should favor, it would be Social Security reform because it doesn't hit them. Now let's turn to taxes, for instance. If taxes are increased, if income taxes are increased, then current elderly who pay income tax will pay more. Or in Medicare, if they decide that some or other premiums have to go up even more, or that there's higher co-payment rates, or that they're going to provide incentives for people to join different types of organizations that might be able to reduce cost, well, current elderly might have to face some of those choices as well. So say the interesting point of it is among the current elderly, Social Security reform probably is least likely to impact them, except possibly for this cost of living adjustment. Medicare, they'll be in the boat of if payments to providers are reduced, that's going to affect their providers. And in the tax system, if they're paying income taxes, they may pay higher income taxes, although many elderly do not pay income tax.